You know, within the delicate fabric of the human experience, there are three common threads that everyone must have with regards to having a happy and fulfilling life. Number one is to be loved. Number two, to be safe and protected. And the third one is to be resourced with proper nourishment, food in our tummies. With regards to the rest of the animal kingdom, all living creatures must have these same basic needs met in order to thrive and to survive. Well, unfortunately, even in the most advanced and sophisticated cultures, we still have individuals who are trapped in their own confusion and ignorance, inflicting pain and suffering on others. Oftentimes, these victims, or rather I should say these survivors, are the ones without a voice, the innocent, the four-legged members of our extended family, our fur babies. Well, fortunately for us, we also have advocates and organizations who have worked tirelessly throughout their lives to protect the sanctity of these beautiful creatures. Well, I just happen to be sitting with one of these remarkable individuals today. Her name is Claudine Wilkins, and Claudine has spent the last 30 years of her life dedicated both on a legislative and judicial platform with regards to animal welfare and protection. Well, how you doing, Claudine?
Great to be here, Tim. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for joining us and taking the time. And I don't think I'm going out of bounds here when I make this statement, and I'm going to go ahead and make it. But Claudine, you are truly a warrior when it comes to animal welfare. Could we just jump right into your story and tell us how you got involved with animal welfare?
Well, it started, I guess, with most little kids, back in the early 70s. I was just a, 5-year-old kid, and I grew up in a not so, big house. It was tiny, actually, and we had 6 kids in this tiny little shoebox of a house. And my next door neighbor was a truck driver, and he had kids, about 4 kids. And I remember growing up, and he had little chihuahuas, and he would never let them come inside, and they would constantly have litters of puppies. And I remember one cold night, he made them stay outside as usual. The female had just given birth to this beautiful little set of 2 puppies. And there they were inside of an old garbage can. That was the doghouse, the garbage can. It was one of those metal garbage cans. And I remember being a little kid running outside at night. My parents didn't know it. And I went in there to cover them up with a blanket. And I reached in and I grabbed one of the puppies. And that's the first time I ever held anything that was dead. And it really shook me up. And it was cold too, and I remember feeling, oh my God, if I had only gotten here sooner, and only if they had just brought the puppies inside for the night, because we all knew it was going to freeze. But he didn't care, and so I grew up in a household where next to me was this man who showed his children how to be empathetic by not caring and not doing the right things. But in my family, just right 50 feet away in my house, we had bunnies, we had ducks, we had lizards, and whatever came to our doorstep was our newest pet. We had dogs, and we loved them. And my parents showed me how to love animals, and they were kind to animals. And so that was the beginning of my desire to want to see change. But really, it was back when, back in the old days, we only had 3 channels on TV, 3 networks. We actually had to get up off the table or the chair and change the channel. There was no remote control back then. But I remember it was a wonderful night because it was after church, and it was the time that our whole family got together in our living room, which was tiny, and 6 children and parents. So we had 8 people and our dogs and everybody, and we would sit and watch Wild Kingdom. Remember that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so it took me on this journey outside of my tiny house to Africa and to the Serengeti, and to see there was a whole world out there of beautiful wild animals. And I just loved
Merle Perkins.
Is it Merle Perkins? Merle somebody.
It was Merle, yeah.
Mutual
Well, Jim Fowler, we
Yeah.
had Jim Fowler's nephew on our show.
All right. So anyway, so these shows were fabulous to me. And then, of course, my second love was getting my National Geographic in the mail. To me, I lived for that day when it came in, and I would scour every page and read and read. And then I started to read more stories about somebody who kept coming up on the front cover of National Geographic, and it was Jane Goodall. And she really was an inspiration for me. Here this woman was going into the darkest parts of Africa and the jungles to learn about chimpanzees. And she was the first scientist in the world to call her subjects by name. She did not number her subjects like all scientists before her. She was the first ever to name her subjects. And I read about her and her work, and she was such an inspiration to me. So that was the beginning of my love for animals. And then I went off to school, and there was this book called Animal Doctor. And I checked it out over and over again. And in fact, it was those days where you had to pull out the card and put your name on it and it got a stamp. Well, I remember looking at it, and there was no one else's name on it. The entire card was my name about 25 times. And I read it over and over again, and it was ironic because my mother was actually a ballerina, and I wanted to either be a ballerina like most little girls or a veterinarian like most little girls. So that was it. I knew I came to my father one day with a piece of notebook paper, and I wrote an oval on it. And maybe it was an inspiration from Disney, Walt Disney, but I said, Dad, when I grow up, I want to have the wonderful world of animals. I want to have, this portion will be to save these dogs that nobody wants, and this portion will be to fix them if they're broken bones, and this portion will be, and so I had it all dissected up of how I wanted to create this wonderful world of animals. And he goes, he called me baby, and he's Greek, he has this very strong Greek accent. He goes, you can do whatever you want. We live in America, and he was an immigrant. And for him, somebody asked him, what would you do if you won the lottery? And he said, well, I already have. I got to come to America, and my parents were the products of World War II. And to them, coming to America was every opportunity was at our hands. So I decided, okay, I want to be a veterinarian. And so that was my path until I was about 16. Along the way, of course, I did take ballet. My mother was the teacher, and I was, I just knew it wasn't for me. And we had dogs and cats and lots of animals along the way, and I trained them, and I took them to school. I'd hide them in the car when I shouldn't have, and they were always with me. So when I had the opportunity to become involved with my first job ever at 16 was as a vet assistant. And back then, we didn't call ourselves vet techs. You're on the job training, right? So there I am, a bit naive, and I put my smocks on. I'm so excited to learn about the world of veterinary medicine. And I worked for 3 different veterinarians at the time. And there were pivotal moments in there. There were some great stories and just wonderful experiences. But some of those pivotal moments were, one time I was asked to assist in a surgery, and a woman had come in and dumped her dog off and said, I'm tired of this dog having puppies, and I want it spayed. And the veterinarian said, well, she's almost due, to have puppies. And she said, I don't care, I'm just tired of it. And she was actually mad at her dog for getting pregnant, even though she was letting her pet roam the streets to get pregnant over and over again. So here we are dealing with her mess that she could have prevented. And I'm 16, I'm in the room, my hands are gloved, I'm in the guts with this doctor working on this animal. And he says, now I want you to hold this, and I don't want you to break it. I want you to set it into the garbage can as soon as I give it to you. And I didn't know what he was talking about. This was my first week on the job. And he's in there, and he lifts out this thing that looks like an inner tube. And he hands it to me, and I cradle it. And I don't even know what it is. I'm just holding it. And he goes, don't drop it, don't move it, don't do anything, just set it down into the trash can. So as I'm walking to the trash can, I can feel it moving. I can feel the whole inner tube just gyrating and moving. And I set it down, and you can sort of see through it because it's actually the uterus. And there were 7 puppies in there wanting to live. And if I had broken the the uterus, that they would all have been born, and then he would have had to euthanize each and every one of them. So I set it down, and I realized what I was doing at that moment. I said, oh my God, I'm discarding in the trash puppies. So there I am. I realized at that moment, oh my God, I just threw away 7 beautiful lives because this woman allowed her dog to get pregnant, and she didn't care enough to keep it, in her house. Later that day, something must have happened. Somebody must have threw something else in the trash, and sure enough, I went back because I was checking all throughout the day to make sure, because he said over time they'll die without oxygen. Well, it didn't happen that way. They actually did break free, and there they were at the bottom of this trash can with other trash on top of it, dirty gloves and blood and cotton swabs, and there's these beautiful little puppies at the bottom of this trash can. And this was funny because for me it was the first time I ever cussed out loud, and I said, who the fuck is going to stop this chaos? Who is going to stop this? And I went, I looked around. I thought, I hope somebody didn't hear that, because my mother's a good Catholic woman and we weren't, raised to cuss. And I was so angry. And then not too long after that was my first request to hold a dog. That was a mixed lab. And the doctor said, hold him still, hold him still. And he was this perfectly good-looking dog. I come to find out that the owner wanted him euthanized because she was moving. And the doctor obliged, which bothered me quite a bit. And he doesn't tell me what I'm doing. So the veterinarian says, come over here, I need you to roll a vein, which means you got to hold the dog and you got to get in there and you roll the vein, you shave some of the hair off so that the veterinarian can find a vein. So I'm just holding this beautiful dog. He's licking me in the face and he's happy as can be. He's this cute little brown mixed lab. And I can feel his warmth on my body, and I'm cradling him. I'm not very big, so I'm reaching around and hugging him, basically, and the doctor's injecting them. I'm not asking questions because that's not my job. And then suddenly the dog just falls into my shoulder and just lays on my lap. And he goes, you can put him in the fridge in about 10 minutes. And I just realized that this is the second time in my life I'm holding a dead animal. The first time was that puppy, right? And here I am, just taking this dog who was living 2 seconds before licking me on the face, and I'm putting him in a refrigerator, and I'm 16. And there again, I said, who the fuck is going to change this, And so those pivotal moments really had an indelible mark on me, because most of those cases came from people who could have done something about it and prevented that from happening. That person who was moving could have found and rehomed that poor little dog. Those puppies should never have been born because she should have never gotten pregnant if she didn't want her to. Spay and neuter. How simple is that? This was almost 30 years ago. Actually, to be quite honest, it was 33 years ago that happened. And so I've learned a lot since then.
Claudine, that's a truly amazing story. And I think it's really, truly a testament to your spirit and the type of person who you are, that you were able to take these really difficult moments from your childhood and transform them. And really, this became your life work, right? It became your life goal to protect these animals.
It did, yes. I wanted to be a veterinarian, so I still wanted to be a veterinarian, and that was my thing. So I went off to college. I got into chemistry, and then organic chemistry. And,
which is the track you take to become
right.
a veterinarian.
And now all along, I've never been a very tall person, and I've always stuck up for the underdog. I've always been that person that was the loudest bark in the room, and I was not afraid of people. If somebody was doing someone wrong, I was always the one that was friends with that kid that nobody else wanted to talk to. And so I had a great deal of empathy. But what happened is I realized that I was good at protecting others. And being a veterinarian, you can help one animal at a time, most of the time. Mm-hmm. And the law dictates how we behave in society. And I thought, I see myself in that position. And then chemistry really helped me change that because when I took chemistry, I made a big fat D. It hit me right in the face. And so I thought, am I really cut out for physics and medicine and biology? And I love that stuff, but I needed the grades, plus I was severely dyslexic. And I didn't know that at the time. We didn't talk about dyslexia back in the 70s or 80s. And I was having real trouble retaining things and reading. And so I ended up deciding that I'm going to take chemistry again. And I did. I made a D. And then I took it again. I made a B. So it was the teacher, not me. No, seriously, it was not my... Something inside said, this is not your path. Go somewhere else. And I knew law was pulling me in because I felt like law is the way to change bigger things. My new plan then was to go to law school. And so that's what I did. And dealing with dyslexia at the same time, I realized that I had to read what I was reading out loud, audio tape it, and then listen to it again. So I had to speak it, hear it, and see it for me to really absorb it, which was fine. It worked out for me. And I became known as the Westlaw Queen. I was always researching and reading and understanding, wow, this is what I want to do.
And that was your intention from the beginning. I mean, once you decided you were going to become a lawyer, it was with the intent of advocating for animals, for animal welfare.
Yes. And at the time, there was no such thing as an animal lawyer at all. Nobody was teaching it. I couldn't find any schools to teach it, so I just got my JD degree. And then I researched 3 years later, at the end of my degree, there were 2 schools teaching animal law, and it was a very small little elective course in the summer. And I decided at my last year in law school, I interned at the Fulton County DA's office, and my mentor, who I interned for, was Nancy Grace. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about crime, and I thought, this is where I can be to start off, to learn how to protect victims. Even as a young law student, I realized the connection between domestic violence and animal cruelty. I had studied what the FBI studied in the early 70s, which is how they became profilers, basically. They started studying serial killers. They wanted to know why they thought the way they thought. And they started seeing the underlying denominator in most of these serial killers was animal cruelty.
They start out abusing animals
Correct.
First as children.
Right. So as a law student, I studied that. I read about how they began their behavioral science unit and realized the connection. Most of the fellow prosecutors I worked with had no clue of the connection whatsoever. As a student, I was allowed to be in the courtroom and prosecute alongside Nancy Grace. I mean, we were allowed to do that under the Third Year Practice Act. So I was actually allowed to prosecute. Now I did it second chair.
And this was when Nancy Grace was a prosecutor here in the state of Georgia, in Fulton County.
Correct. Yes, this is right before entertainment found Nancy Grace. And she was a great inspiration for me, by the way. Nancy taught me a lot, actually. One of the things is she taught me not to be afraid and to talk on my feet and to approach a courtroom and to approach a judge and to do it very diplomatically. And so anyway, I realized at that point I wanted to get my master's in law, and I researched the schools out there, and there were 2 teaching animal law. One was Vermont Law School, the other Lewis and Clark. And I decided to go to Vermont Law School, where I met my professor, Stephen Wise, who some people consider the father of animal welfare. He's written many books. He's more on the philosophical side of things, where I am more interested in the everyday, how can we make and change and do something about animal cruelty now, today. Whether you're a lawyer or not, what can you do to make a change today? Just like I did that moment when I was 16, I said, who is going to change this? Well, it's everybody. It's you, it's me, and people watching. If you can do something, we're all teachers out there. So I went off to get my master's at Vermont, and it was a great experience. And then I came back and became a prosecutor.
Here in Fulton County?
No, actually, I became a prosecutor in Cobb County, where I lived.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
And I'll never forget. It was probably a month into my days, and we had on-the-job training. We didn't really get to go and learn much anywhere else, but when you become a prosecutor, they send you off to prosecutors boot camp, which is in middle Georgia. And it's a whole
Really?
week. Yes, they do.
It's
yes,
a real
they
boot
do.
camp?
Yes, and they called it boot camp. So there I am, and they teach you the basics of, what to expect as a prosecutor. And I'll never forget, there was a woman there who's been also a mentor to me, Kim Schwartz. And she got up and spoke about domestic violence and her cases. And I remember talking to her, and she mentioned a little bit about animal cruelty. But that was it. No training whatsoever in animal cruelty as a brand new prosecutor. We didn't know how to prosecute cases. We didn't know the law. We didn't know the link.
What were the laws then? The law was pretty much a slap on the wrist up into what, 2000, 2001?
That's right.
It was a $50 fine for torturing animals.
It was a simple misdemeanor. Pretty much you could torture an animal and it would only be charged as a misdemeanor.
Right.
And often not charged at all. So here she is, and in fact, she was instrumental in getting the law passed in 2000 to make it a felony. And we were one of the last states to have it as a felony.
I remember that. I vividly remember that.
Right. So Kim played a big role in my life. And it's ironic, just today in this interview, I got a call this morning from that very same place that I had my boot camp asking me now to do a full-fledged entire day conference for all the police officers in the state of Georgia. And I asked Kim to be my partner on that. So we'll see what happens.
The circle of life.
Yeah, so it's been a historical day just today, which is great.
Oh, wonderful.
And then I remember when I became a prosecutor, there was a few cases. And one of those was interesting because as I had some training in animal care, I knew a little bit about zoology and zoonotic diseases. And I'll never forget, there was a case where it was a chow dog that came in with mange, and they brought it in and they charged it as animal cruelty. And it had almost 80% of its body covered in this mange, and it was called sarcoptic mange. And I knew enough to know that sarcoptic mange was transferable to humans. And as the officer was leaving my room, he said, well, I heard there's a little girl that lives in this house, and she's going to be very disappointed because she sleeps with this dog, and she loves it so much. So said her mother. And I said, can you come back in my office? And he said, yeah. I said, well, I want you to go back out there. If she slept with this dog, there's a high probability she may have scabies and all these other parasites that can be transferable. So he goes back out there. This little girl was so malnourished. She had not been to school for 2 months, and she was being severely neglected by her mother. So that dog case was a child abuse case. And that was the story that people don't connect. And I thought to myself, I'm just somebody who happened to know a little bit about it because I was 16 as a vet assistant. I need to teach my fellow prosecutors this information because there is a direct link between neglect of an animal and neglect of children.
Now, have you discovered that being able to make that connection between the two, has that brought more awareness to animal abuse?
Yes.
With regards to connecting it to children abuse?
Well, the more I got into it, the cases are astounding. They're so brutally astounding, and they're not just simple neglect. I mean, we're talking dark web, child pornography, bestiality, and the connection of selling videos and harming children. It's very deep and dark and deprived, and some people just can't handle it. We did in our conferences, we talk about those connections.
Can we talk about the conference that you started?
Yes.
So can we, what's the background behind it?
So that started because of one case, and this was when I was prosecuting. It was a case that dealt with 36 German Shepherds. And I was just
Could you repeat that?
36 German Shepherds, yes. And I love German Shepherds. I grew up with them. I've had them all my life. And this case struck me because I didn't watch TV that much, but I caught a glimpse of the news that night. And what it was images of these German Shepherds that looked like skeletons. They were still alive, but they looked like walking skeletons. And what had happened is this officer, an investigator who worked for the Cobb DA's office, was driving past a dog groomer's facility on South Cobb Drive. And he noticed one of these dogs was tied up to a tether, and there was a cliff. And he just thought, I'm going to be a good Samaritan and go into the groomer's office and say, hey, you might not want to tie this dog up so close to that drop-off. He might hang himself. Well, when he walked in there, something was wrong in his mind. He knew something was wrong. And the woman who was operating the facility, Nancy was her name, I believe, I think she knew she was about to get caught. So she was not sure what to do. And he says, do you mind if I look around? And he went downstairs below the dog grooming facility, flipped on a light switch, and it was one bulb in this dark, damp basement. There was water on the floor. And as soon as the lights went on, he saw these cages and cages and cages of these skeletal dogs that had been there all their lives, so much so that their backs grew curves instead of the true German Shepherd slope. They were eating raw chicken. She was vetting them herself. She never took them out of the cage. She only allowed them to produce puppies, and she was selling the puppies. And so I remember seeing that, and I called my friend who I used to work for, the veterinarian. I said, we're going to go to the shelter tomorrow, and we're going to take pictures of these dogs. And so I said, let's do it. We go there. There they are. And I still have these pictures. And I had, back in the day when you had to take your film and be developed, I had double prints made. I had a set for myself, and I said, I'm going to bring these to the prosecutor. Not knowing too much about the chain of custody, I said, I'm just going to give them to whoever it is. So I drive to the prosecutor's office. I said, here's some pictures you might be able to use. And then a year later, I become a prosecutor in that county. And I get a call from animal control, and they said, hey, whatever happened to that case? And I thought to myself, must have been prosecuted, right? Come to find out, it had not. So I found the prosecutor assigned to that case, and I walked into her office, and I said, hey, where's that case? She goes, oh, that case? And I said, yeah. She goes, it's back there. And it was on the floor in an accordion file. And I walked over to it, and I literally took my finger, and I went like that, and there was dust on it. I said, do you mind if I take over this case? She goes, you can have it. And the next thing she said was another pivotal moment for me. I said, why didn't you prosecute it? She goes, it's just an animal case. And I said, it's mine now. And I took it. And I prosecuted that case. And another pivotal moment was when the animal control officer said to me in the hallway, I'll never forget, he said, we're sick and tired of working our butts off, giving you these cases, and nothing happens. And I said, under my watch, that's going to change. And that was the reason I started the first conference. And I went to my boss and I said, can I put everybody involved in an animal cruelty case in the same room so that we understand our roles and how each of us need to be a part of this case to make sure they don't fall through the cracks? And he says, well, you can, but do it on your time. And so that was my boss. Do it on your time.
That's remarkable. You know what you are? You're a guru. Seriously, because the word guru means to lift the veil of darkness.
Oh.
And that's what every single story you've been sharing with us, you're lifting the veil of darkness and exposing the truth, which is just remarkable. I mean, it truly is.
Well, I guess so. You know, at the time I didn't think so. I was kind of afraid of my bosses. I was afraid of always making change and being that person that kept scratching, the door saying, we got to do something here. Something's got to change. So I said, screw it. I'm going to get on the phone. I called somebody I knew and I said, can we do a conference in this little county? And there I was having my first conference, looking at uniformed officers in front of me. And here I am, this, young 20-something-year-old, petite blonde, prosecutor going, okay, this is what I know. And this is what I want you to know. And I have to say, I was delighted and warmed by the fact that some of these officers came up to me and said, I've never had this training. I can't believe you've done it. We need to have more of it. I love animals. Anybody that hurts a dog, they're going to get it. I was expecting, this is such a waste of our time. I came here because my boss forced me to. It wasn't that. This group of law enforcement that I was lucky to have at my first conference ever, this was back in 1998. They were gracious and they cared. They wanted to be there. And these big burly guys in their, bulletproof vests and their uniforms and all their guns, they came up to me and said, thank you for doing this. I have a dog. If somebody messes with my dog, I'm going to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
They're very passionate. So I got
And they're
lucky.
on the front lines too.
Right.
I mean, those guys they're the first responders, right?
They are. In fact, I grew up in an age when we still called it the dog pound, It's
Mm-hmm.
and then we call it the animal shelter. And to me, that's still not enough because some people think I'm going to take this dog or cat and dump it at the animal shelter where it's going to get shelter, and it's an animal shelter. I'm going to turn and walk away, and it's their problem now. I want to call it the animal adoption center, where the word adopt, which is a verb, tells what the people should do, right? Mm-hmm. I don't want to call them dog catchers. I want to call them animal humane first responders because they are sometimes the first responders.
Right.
The main thing at these conferences was not just to have police there or prosecutors. I wanted vet techs, veterinarians, prosecutors, judges, law enforcement, animal control, students, rescues, shelter, dog trainers, animal behaviors, anybody that has a role to play.
So your conference has gone from a whole bunch of cops to everything you just mentioned.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yes. And last year we had to max out. We had a full house and we had to turn people away because the fire marshal said you can't have any more people.
What a great problem.
Yeah, it's a great problem. So this year we were asked to join Georgia Veterinary Medical Association and Vet South, which is their conference, and there were about 550 people there, and we had our conference alongside of theirs, and we had just a few months to plan it, and it was a huge success.
Oh, that is great. That is wonderful. So can you share with us some of the other programs that you're involved with? I mean, with regards to education and bringing awareness to
Sure.
all of these incredible issues?
Right. So if we don't have education, we're lost, right? And so 27 years ago, I started answering the questions. People would call me and say, hey, what do I do is animal abandonment a crime in Georgia? And if so, well, how do I investigate it? So this is kind of before emails were really big, and I would write the answer and I would give it to them, and then about a week later I'd get the same question. I go, dang it, I wish I would have kept that answer because I got to retype it. So then I started keeping my answers, and I knew back then, I said, one day these answers are going to be needed. And so along the years, I look back and there's 300 answers, then there's 3,000 answers, and then there's 40 files. And then I realized these are the things that people need to know, and you can't contain knowledge. You need to put it out there. So these became the beginning of my toolkits. And I thought, well, I then presented them at conferences, and I handed them out on paper. And then I got a call from somebody from South Georgia, and they said, we'd love to come to your conference. We can't afford to. And I said, don't worry, I'll give you a scholarship. And then they said, great. And a week before the conference, we can't come because we can't afford the gas money. And then I realized, ding, on the top of my head, all of these toolkits need to be downloadable on a website. Mm-hmm. So that was the birth of Animal Law Source. And so I took all those 27 years of answers and started putting them in toolkits so that if somebody needs to know, you have to know your state law. To me, if you don't know your state law, you're lost. You don't know anything. You need to know what Georgia state law is if you're going to prosecute in Georgia. And same thing in New Hampshire or wherever you are. So this allows one person to download information on a particular subject matter and learn how to investigate it, prosecute it, or even just learn about it. It could be just for the average person to learn about pet ownership responsibility. Mm-hmm. Where are resources in my town for spay and neuter or vaccines? So it was a resource in that way. So we've got legislation that needs to be passed, we've got education that needs to be had, and we have resources to give. Those are the things I think you started out with.
I want to step back a little bit. I want to go back just a few moments here. You mentioned Jane Goodall as being one of your inspirations. Right. Can we talk a little bit about the time that you actually got to meet her?
Yes. Oh, wow. That was just like meeting, I guess, for some people like Elvis Presley or somebody.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, she to me was a rock star. She's only an inch taller than I am. And what I loved about her was I was in law school in Vermont, and I decided to write about the bushmeat industry, which is in Africa. They kill gorillas and chimpanzees to eat their meat, and they orphan these poor little babies and leave them out in the jungle when they take the larger animals to sell for bushmeat. So I was very naive at the time, and I asked if I could meet her, and it was a long process, but she agreed to meet with me, and I had to drive down to New York City, and I was very happy to do so. And at the last minute, her assistant called and said, Jane has the flu, and she still will meet you, but she has to meet you in Connecticut. So as I'm driving down, this is before cell phones and GPS, I had to stop and figure out how to get to Connecticut. So I'm driving by myself, and we go, and I meet her at her office in Connecticut, and I'm waiting, and she comes out, and like I said, when I first meet her, I'm like, oh, wow. And she's so tiny, and she's so eloquent, and she sits with me just like we're doing today, and I tell her what I want to do. I want to go to Tanzania. I want to stop the bush. And she looks at me, she grabs my arm, she says, darling, do you want to be murdered? And I said, what do you mean? And she wasn't joking. She said, you can't be naive. the police are in it too, the poaching industry. And, they're in it too because there's such poverty-stricken places that they want to put food on their table that night for their children. And the laws go out the back door, and whatever money talks. And so it was an enlightening moment, but I told her how much of an inspiration she was for me. And the fact that she met me so sick and having the flu and still met me was amazing as well. One other thing too is National Geographic, is how I learned about Jane Goodall. Mm-hmm. And this was in 1997. I was still in law school at the time. And a friend of mine, the doctor I worked for when I was 16, called me and said, there's a guy that has found a baby lion. The story behind that is pretty remarkable. Do you want to hear it? And I said, of course I do. Sure. So what happened is this guy who works in Miami Circle, which is in downtown, Buckhead, Georgia, where they sell a lot of antiques. Mm-hmm. These two guys come in with a lot of cash, and they're buying antiques, and they're like, I want this, I want that. And they're shelling out, the greenbacks. There's a wad of cash in each of their hands. And the guy who's selling to them just says, there's something not right here, Who comes in and just starts buying so much stuff? So he decides he's going to take a few of the lamps and things out to their car. And as he goes to the car, and this is in the hot summer August sun in Georgia, which is hot.
Absolutely.
He goes out to the car, and in the back seat is this beautiful little lion cub. And he says, and it just so happens that his girlfriend is a major obsessed with lions. She just loves lions. And he says, what are you doing with this lion cub? What do you have him in the back of your... And they said, we're going to raise him as a mascot. And it turns out these guys, long story short, these guys were drug dealers. That's why they had all this cash. Sure. And they had gotten this lion from some breeder in Texas, I believe, which I came to find out you could easily get a lion declawed and everything for $500 if you wanted to. So this lion ends up in the hands of this owner of this antique shop because he said, you're not leaving here until you either give me that lion or I'll buy it. But I'm not letting you leave. Otherwise, I'm going to call the police. Because he knew something was wrong. And they said, fine, we'll give him to you. Or I think he bought it from them. And then the call came in, the vet got the call, and then I got the call. So we went to this house, which is on the most expensive street in Georgia, in West Paces Ferry, mm-hmm. and pick up this beautiful lion. I have it in my house because we're trying to place it, because you really can't have a wild animal without a permit. So I'm calling Disney World because they're building Animal Kingdom at this time.
Oh, right.
I'm trying to place this beautiful little lion. And then the moment I bring it into my house, it jumps up on my coffee table and picks up a National Geographic and starts chewing on it. And there I am with my disposable camera. I'm just shooting pictures of it because I'm in awe of this beautiful animal. And sure enough, I snap a picture. He's got the National Geographic in his mouth. And, I forget about the camera. And then I have this animal that I'm trying to find a home for 2 weeks. Everybody and their brother wants to come see this animal. And he sleeps with me. He sucks my thumb because he's still trying to nurse. He's a little bitty thing. I named him Simba. And he was just amazing. He smelled so good. But the moment you put anything... He ate raw meat at this time. I mean, he was old enough to eat meat. And let me tell you, the instinctual side of him came out the moment there was food presented. He could harm you. Even though he was this big, sure. His teeth and claws were just as sharp, and he was strong. So I got to know how to feed him, and all along we were trying to place him. But the amazing story was that we found him a beautiful place at Noah's Ark in South Atlanta, where he got to live the rest of his life out alongside of a bulldog named Pebbles. So Simba and Pebbles were best friends.
They became friends?
They became friends.
Oh, how wonderful.
And they lived this beautiful life together. And then I forgot about the film, and then I took it, had it developed, and I got the double prints again, and there it is. And I thought, this is a great picture. I should send it to National Geographic. Not thinking anything about it, I sent it in with a little note saying, hey, this story behind this little cub is pretty amazing. And they called me back and they said, can we publish this? And I said, of course, why not? So here I am in the magazine that I truly loved in 1998, and there's the picture of Simba. And my name on the letter, and I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. And during that time, I had researched how easy it was to get a lion, how easy it was to get it declawed. Any person could just get a wild animal and raise it in their house. And it's ridiculous that we're allowed to do that. I learned that all these places that you go get pictures with the cute little cub, when that cub gets to a certain age, they have to discard it and get another one. And you should not be taking your picture with cubs. From what I've learned about that whole industry, it's terrible. The dirty little secret behind that is atrocious. And people who are getting those cute pictures to send off in their selfies or whatever, they don't know the dirty little secret that I know, that I've researched behind that. So there's so many things to learn. And truly the only way we're going to change is if we educate, create awareness, change our laws, enforce our laws, and do training for those that protect animals. And unless we tap into the young generation and have them understand that this is their planet, that they have to take care of, that animals are not to our disposal. Like Descartes said, that if it can't think, it can't feel. Well, I know when I put my hand on the stove, it hurts. And if you put a dog's paw near the fire, he's going to pull back because he can feel and he can think. We know that now. 25 years ago, we weren't talking about this stuff. We didn't have Animal Planet. We didn't have Nat Geo on TV. We didn't have 1,000 channels to learn from and podcasts. Mm-hmm. But we have that now. And children have an innate connection from birth. When they're born, kids know that there's a connection between animals and children. And the environments we put them in help break those bonds. Mm-hmm. And we need not to do that. We need to teach them empathy. We need to teach them that they're their stewards that take care of our planet, what we eat, how we treat animals, whether they're ferocious gorillas that are actually very docile if you get to know some of them, or just the household dog,
Sure.
We don't keep them outside anymore like we used to. Times have changed. This is the time to pounce on change. And somebody has to fucking do it now,
Absolutely. And is that one of the focuses of your conference with regards to educating children? Is that what you're trying to do? Reach out towards the youth?
Yes. So what I do, two things I want people to walk away from when they go to my conference. Two things. I want them to know that they are teachers. That they themselves, whatever the story, I've got a million stories, but they do too. They're at my conference because they care. Mm-hmm. Whether they're a police officer or a shelter director or just a dog washer at a vet clinic, whatever they are, they care about animals. But they are teachers. They can go into the schools and teach a kid how to approach an animal and not get bit, and turn that into, and by the way, what do you do with your animal? Because the kids don't want to hear you talk the 20 minutes on career day. They want to talk about their stories. They have a story to tell. We'll have 100 hands at the end of the career day, and not one of them really want to ask me a question. They want to tell me a story about their own dog or cat. And so that innocence and love and bond needs never to be broken. When we break that, we won't have change, and we need that.
Well, thankfully, we have you, because you're definitely one of the leaders in this whole huge issue. Mm-hmm. And I just find you just be a remarkable human being. I truly do,
Thank
Claudine.
You. And I don't think of myself that way myself, but I do know that...
Again, you're a warrior. I mean, you're out there. Well, can we talk about really briefly? I know you have probably 100, maybe 1,000 stories, mm-hmm. but can you share with us some of your triumphant moments?
Sure. In a lot of my trainings, I show this slide. It's a picture of a magazine that I found at an antique shop from 1966. It's Life.
66.
1966, and it's Life magazine, and in it is a picture of what we now call a puppy mill. And the caption says, a dog concentration camp. And so that was happening back in the 60s, as it was in the 40s, as it was in the 30s. But should it be happening now? And let me tell you, it is happening now. This year alone, in Georgia, we started out with a bang. We had over 1,200 dogs being saved in 3 puppy mills in parts of Georgia. That shouldn't be going on anymore. One owner had over 800 dogs under his care.
800?
800, yes. And his main goal was profit. One of the cases I worked on was a German Shepherd case. So I was asked to come down. And basically, I arrive on the scene. It's January. So I thought it's going to be very cold. It was a warm day in January, and there are just dogs and dogs lined up. And what led up to this moment was this person who had one puppy mill realized that the heat was coming down on her. So she starts moving big portions of her lot of animals to different places in Georgia. And these women in the middle of nowhere start hearing these dogs howling in the night. And very harsh sounds, not your typical barking. Mm-hmm. And they were able to find out that some of these dogs were kept in this remote spot, and they weren't being fed, they weren't being watered, they were actually cannibalizing each other because there was not enough food. And so they kept pushing the envelope and trying to get local authorities to prosecute, and nothing was happening, nothing. And finally, a commissioner in one county said enough is enough. And the story broke, it entered the media, and then all of a sudden, I'm brought to just an extraction. I get down there and the sheriff's there, and I said, Sheriff, this is animal cruelty. This is not dogs just living happily. I said, let me show you, walk with me. And we walk this property. And I show him dog after dog. I said, cruelty, cruelty, cruelty. Living conditions, horrible. Failure to provide vet care, no food, no water. Everywhere I looked, there was cruelty. And I said, these are all separate charges, and you're in charge of that. And he promised that he would pursue the case. And so what was sad to me was that I was in the muck and the mud and the feces with my boots on in the trenches, pulling these dogs out, that smell that reeked, that had infections. And this person has not been charged yet. This person was making a lot of profit. She was vetting her own animals. She was doing a lot of things that nobody should be doing. And while this is going on, another puppy mill is brewing just another 100 miles away in Georgia, where one guy is in charge of almost 800 dogs. They're crammed in such tight cages that they learn to sleep standing up. Right? Can you imagine? Once these animals were rescued, one of the rescuers films the dog in her kitchen, and it's standing in the middle, and she says, what is he doing? He's kind of wobbling like this. She realizes he's sleeping, standing up, because he'd learned to stand.
He was conditioned to sleep that way.
That video went viral. I mean, can you imagine? So out of this one puppy mill that I was physically, on the scene, the woman who operated told everyone that she wasn't breeding dogs. Yet when we got down there were dogs kept in cattle pens with no shade whatsoever. Can you imagine? Dogs kept in the hot August Georgia sun with nowhere to roam. They're rolling in the mud to kind of cover themselves from the mud. We look into the igloos. There's one igloo with 5 dogs, and the igloos have mud and water in them. There's no place for these dogs to go. They're clamoring for some shade and some reprieve from the direct hot sun, and there's no water to drink. The only water in there is mixed in with the mud. You'll see. So there's intact females and males in the same pen, so you can't tell me they're not breeding. There's pregnant females already ready to have puppies. And a week after we did our bust, one of the females had puppies, and I am the proud owner of one of those puppies. I couldn't help myself. They were all born sick. The mother was only 50-something pounds when she gave birth. And a German Shepherd should be about 80 pounds, even without puppies in them. And only 9 months later, this puppy I have has to have surgery, had surgery because his femur popped out of his hip.
Oh my goodness.
Because of the bad genetic breeding. Because profit was the number one thing on the mind of this person, not the care of these animals. And the fact that we still have these here in Georgia, in our state, as they showed in 1966, what have we done? We have so much more to do, and I hope the next generation is the change.
Well, we're going to get to go outside and meet this dog, right? What's your dog's name?
Delta, and his name is Delta because he was the 4th one born, so it was Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta.
Oh.
But I was going to change his name, and my neighbor, I was walking the dog, and I love the name Max, who was another dog that was a big influence on my life. And he goes, well, you know what Delta means, don't you? And I said, yeah, I think so. And he goes, it means change. And it does in math, it means change. And I said, his name has got to remain Delta.
He's the bridge to change.
Yes, so his name is Delta, and it is change. It's time for change. Let me introduce you to Delta.
I'd love to meet him. How old is he?
He's just about 10 months old, and he's a sweetie pie. He's black and tan, although they say he's blue and tan. I don't know. I've never heard of that combination, but he's a sweet dog. He plays really well with my other dog. He was also a rescue. And one of the things we decided to do is we want to tell his story. So I had a woman who knows how to make these things really well. I had her make this thing called, say, Ask Me Where I Came From. Because we were going to put it on him, and he wore this at our conference. It's a little halter that you put right on him. Because I want people to ask the story of where he came from. Because without the awareness of, puppy mills and, these bad places, people are going to just assume I got him from a breeder.
Right.
Hello.
Well, what do you guys think? Do you want to be interviewed? Huh? Of course.
Anyway, so Delta, as you can see, he's had surgery about a week ago. And we noticed that when he was about 7 months old, he wasn't running a lot, and he was not gaining a lot of weight because he wasn't gaining any muscle mass. And then I noticed his foot was kind of crossing a lot in his back area, so we had him x-rayed, and we found that his ball and socket had separated because he's got hip dysplasia at the young age of 9 months old. And this is again because the person who bred him only cared about profit, not about the care and the genetic makeup of their quality of breed. And his sister also had the same problem. So
And where is she?
she's somewhere in Georgia. She was adopted out. The mother was a sweet dog. She's still living with the failed foster, and so he's a great dog.
And he's absolutely a success story too. I mean, what a wonderful.
Yeah, and the thought of him living in the hot sun in a cattle pen in mud and feces and starving for water and care, I can't imagine. I mean, he's brought me so much joy, and it's not, do dogs love us? Can we love dogs? Can we love animals? Is the question. Good boy.
This has been a wonderful experience. I just want to thank Claudine for coming out here and sharing her life story with us. And I want to also let you guys know that we will definitely be having Claudine back at some point to continue to share her story and the continuation of animal welfare and the sanctity of all animals. Claudine, thanks again for coming out. We so appreciate it. We really, really do.
Roll over. When you adopt a shelter pet, you discover all the things that make them unique. They're a little bit of a lot of things, but they're all pure love.